What if everything you've been told about being a good person is actually the reason you're losing in life? What if the qualities society celebrates, kindness, empathy, forgiveness, are nothing more than chains designed to keep you manageable, controllable, weak? There's a truth about human nature that lurks beneath the surface of every interaction, every relationship, every power dynamic you'll ever encounter. And it's a truth that Thomas Shelby understood better than almost anyone. This isn't about becoming a villain. It's about seeing the game for what it really is. And in Peaky Blinders, we watch a man who refuses to play by the rules everyone else pretends to follow. So let me ask you this. Are you ready to hear what nobody wants to tell you about how the world actually works? Thomas Shelby didn't start as a gangster. He started as a soldier, a man who went to war and came back with his eyes open to a fundamental reality that most people spend their entire lives avoiding. He saw what happens when the veneer of civilization is stripped away, when the rules disappear and survival becomes the only law that matters. In the trenches of France, Tommy learned that human beings are not inherently good or evil. They're strategic, they're calculating, and they will do whatever it takes to survive when pushed to the edge. This understanding became the foundation of everything he built afterward, and it's the same understanding that separates those who lead from those who follow. Here's the uncomfortable truth. Society functions on a carefully maintained illusion. The illusion that we're all cooperating for the greater good, that fairness exists, that hard work and morality will be rewarded. But Thomas Shelby knew better. He understood that beneath every handshake is a calculation. Beneath every smile is an assessment of value. Beneath every act of kindness is often a transaction waiting to be called in. This doesn't make humanity evil. It makes humanity human. We are animals who learn to wear suits and speak in polite terms. But the fundamental drives remain: dominance, resource acquisition, status, survival. Tommy simply refused to pretend otherwise. Watch how Thomas Shelby enters a room, and you'll see this philosophy in action. He doesn't seek approval. He doesn't try to make people like him. He assesses the power dynamics immediately and positions himself accordingly. When he walks into a meeting with men who think they're superior to him because of their class or wealth or education, he doesn't shrink. He doesn't apologize for who he is. He makes them feel his presence like a physical force. This is because Tommy understands something crucial about human nature. People don't respect what you say. They respect what you make them feel. And if you can make someone feel uncertainty, if you can make them wonder what you're capable of, you've already won half the battle. The first hidden truth about human nature is this: power creates its own morality. Look at how Tommy operates throughout Peaky Blinders, and you'll notice something interesting. His actions aren't judged by some universal moral standard. They're judged by whether he wins or loses. When he succeeds, even his brutality is seen as strength, as necessary, as strategic brilliance. When he fails, the same actions are seen as recklessness or cruelty. This reveals something profound about how humans actually operate. We don't have fixed moral principles. We have outcomes-based ethics. We decide whether something was right or wrong based on whether it worked, not based on some abstract principle of goodness. Thomas Shelby leverages this constantly. He doesn't waste time trying to convince people he's a good man. He demonstrates that he's an effective man, a powerful man, a man who gets results. And once you have power, once you have results, people will rationalize your methods. They'll justify your actions. They'll even celebrate the very things they would have condemned in someone weaker. This is the game that everyone plays, but nobody admits to playing: the constant recalibration of moral judgment based on who's winning. The second hidden truth is about fear and respect, and this is where most people get it completely wrong. Society teaches you that respect comes from being likable, from being agreeable, from making people comfortable. Thomas Shelby proves the opposite. Real respect, the kind that makes people think twice before crossing you. Comey's from a very specific place. It comes from the understanding that you are capable of consequences. Not that you're cruel, not that you're evil, but that you have the capacity and willingness to enforce your boundaries with real stakes attached. Think about Tommy's most powerful moments in the series. They're not when he's being kind or generous, though he can be both. They're when he's demonstrating controlled danger. When he tells someone calmly, quietly, exactly what will happen if they betray him, and you can see in his eyes that he means every word. This is the dance of human nature that polite society refuses to acknowledge. We are all constantly assessing each other's capacity for action, for retaliation, for following through. The people who command the most respect are the ones who've proven they will act, not just threaten, not just posture, but actually execute when their lines are crossed. Now here's where it gets interesting. Thomas Shelby isn't respected because he's the most violent person in Birmingham. There are plenty of thugs in Peaky Blinders who are more brutal, more savage, more willing to hurt people. Tommy is respected because he's strategic about his violence, because he uses it as punctuation, not prose, because when he acts, it's calculated and purposeful, and sends a message that resonates far beyond the immediate action. This is the sophistication that separates power from mere aggression, understanding that force is most effective when it's restrained until the precise moment it becomes necessary. The third hidden truth about human nature is about loyalty, and this might be the most disillusioning one of all. We're taught that loyalty is about love, about bonds, about trust and friendship and family ties that transcend self-interest. Thomas Shelby operates from a different framework entirely. He understands that loyalty is transactional. It's not about emotions. It's about aligned interests, mutual benefit, and the ongoing perception that the relationship serves both parties better than the alternatives. This sounds cold, but watch how Tommy manages his relationships throughout Peaky Blinders, and you'll see the brutal effectiveness of this approach. Tommy is loyal to his family, fiercely so, but even that loyalty is complicated by strategic considerations. He protects them, advances them, includes them in his empire, but he also manages them, manipulates them when necessary, and makes decisions for the collective that might harm individuals. He understands that pure, unconditional loyalty is a fairy tale. What actually exists is a complex web of interdependence where loyalty persists as long as it's reinforced by both emotional bonds and practical benefits. The moment either side of that equation breaks down, loyalty becomes negotiable, and pretending otherwise is just setting yourself up for betrayal. Look at how Tommy handles betrayal in the series. He doesn't rage about moral failures or broken promises. He treats betrayal as information, as a signal that the transactional balance shifted, that someone calculated their interests differently. And his response is never about punishment for its own sake. It's about reestablishing the cost-benefit analysis, about making sure that betraying him is understood to be a losing proposition. This is the adult understanding of loyalty, not as a sacred bond, but as an ongoing negotiation where both parties continuously assess their commitment based on what they're getting and what they risk by leaving. The fourth hidden truth is about vulnerability and how it's weaponized in human interactions. Modern psychology and self-help culture have convinced people that vulnerability is strength, that opening up and sharing your fears and insecurities creates connection and trust. And there's some truth to this in carefully selected personal relationships. But Thomas Shelby understands the other side of this equation, that every piece of vulnerability you share is a potential weapon you're handing to the other person, information they can use against you if the relationship turns adversarial. Watch how Tommy shares information about himself. It's extraordinarily controlled and strategic. He reveals what serves a purpose, what creates a specific perception, what makes people underestimate him or overestimate his willingness to negotiate. But his real fears, his actual weaknesses, his genuine emotional wounds. These he guards like state secrets, and he's right to do so. Because in a world where everyone is constantly assessing power dynamics, your vulnerabilities are leverage points, places where pressure can be applied to make you comply, to make you fold, to make you do things against your interests. This doesn't mean you should never be vulnerable. It means you should be strategic about it. Vulnerability with everyone is naivety. Vulnerability with no one is isolation. But calculated vulnerability with carefully selected people creates genuine bonds, while maintaining your defensive positions everywhere else. Thomas Shelby has a few people, very few, with whom he lets his guard down completely. And even then, you can see him sometimes catch himself, sometimes pull back when he's revealed too much. This is the sophisticated approach to human relationships, recognizing that trust is earned slowly and can be revoked quickly, and that maintaining some mystery, some protection, some boundaries is not coldness but survival. The fifth hidden truth about human nature is about ambition and how society tries to shame it while simultaneously rewarding it. We're taught to be humble, to not want too much, to be satisfied with enough, to not step on others in pursuit of our goals. But look around at who actually succeeds in life, and you'll see something very different. The people at the top didn't get there by being modest and content. They got there by wanting more, by being willing to take risks, by understanding that resources are finite and someone is going to claim them, so it might as well be you. Thomas Shelby is unapologetic about his ambition. He doesn't pretend he's building his empire for altruistic reasons. He wants power. He wants wealth. He wants to elevate his family from the bottom of society to the top. And he's willing to do whatever that requires. And here's what's fascinating. The same society that would have condemned his ambition when he was a poor bookmaker in Small Heath celebrates it once he's successful. Once he's legitimate, once he's Sir Thomas Shelby. This reveals the hypocrisy at the heart of how we talk about ambition. We punish it in the powerless and praise it in the powerful. We call it greed when someone's climbing and vision when they've arrived. The truth is that ambition is the engine of human progress and human competition. The people who change the world, who build things, who reshape society, they're all driven by a desire for more impact, more resources, more control, more legacy. Pretending otherwise is just a way to keep certain people in their place, to make them feel guilty for wanting to rise, to keep the competition manageable for those already at the top. Tommy understood this instinctively. He saw that the rules about knowing your place and being content with your lot were just tools of control, and he rejected them entirely. The sixth hidden truth is about emotions and rationality, and this is where Thomas Shelby becomes particularly instructive. There's a myth in our culture that successful people are purely rational, that they make decisions based only on logic and calculation without emotional interference. But Tommy proves something more nuanced and more realistic. The most effective operators aren't emotionless. They're emotionally intelligent. They feel things deeply, but they don't let those feelings dictate their actions in the moment. They process emotion. They use it as information, but they maintain enough control to act strategically, even when they're feeling intensely. Throughout Peaky Blinders, we see Tommy experience rage, grief, love, fear, all the full spectrum of human emotion. But watch what he does with these feelings. When he's angry, he doesn't lash out impulsively. He notes the anger, identifies its source, and then decides how to respond in a way that serves his interests. When he's afraid, he doesn't let it paralyze him or broadcast it to his enemies. He acknowledges it privately and then acts despite it. When he loves someone, he doesn't let that love blind him to risks or make him stupid about protection. This is emotional maturity at its highest level, feeling fully while maintaining agency over how you respond. The hidden truth here is that emotions are tools. They're information systems that evolved to help us navigate complex social situations and threats. Fear tells you where danger might be. Anger tells you where your boundaries are being violated. Love tells you what's worth protecting. But emotions are terrible decision makers in the moment because they're designed for immediate response, not strategic thinking. The people who win in life are the ones who can feel their emotions fully, extract the information those emotions are providing, and then decide their actions based on both that emotional information and cold strategic calculation. The seventh hidden truth is about change and adaptation, and this is where we see Thomas Shelby's genius most clearly. Most people have a fixed idea of who they are, a consistent identity they try to maintain across all situations. But Tommy understands that rigidity is death, that the ability to adapt, to change your approach, to become whoever you need to be in a given situation, that's what creates unstoppable momentum. He can be a gangster in the morning, a legitimate businessman in the afternoon, a loving father in the evening, and a ruthless strategist at night. And he moves between these versions of himself fluidly because he understands they're all tools, all personas that serve different purposes. This gets to something fundamental about human nature that makes people uncomfortable. There is no single authentic self. There's a collection of potential selves. And which one you embody in any moment is a choice, conscious or unconscious. Society pushes this idea of authenticity, of being true to yourself, but what that often means in practice is being predictable, being easy to categorize, being manageable. The truly powerful people, the ones who shape reality rather than being shaped by it, they're the ones who've mastered the art of strategic authenticity, of being genuinely themselves in private spaces while being strategically adaptive in public ones. Thomas Shelby shows us that you can have core values and still be flexible in how you pursue them. His core value is protecting and elevating his family, but the methods he uses, the persona he adopts, the alliances he forms, all of these are fluid and situational. He doesn't get trapped by who he was yesterday or who people expect him to be. He becomes who he needs to be to win today while keeping his ultimate objectives clear. This is the sophisticated understanding of identity that most people never reach. The understanding that you're not a fixed thing but a process, not a noun but a verb. The eighth hidden truth is about information and how it's the real currency of power. Money is important, violence is important, but information is what determines who wins and who loses in almost every conflict. Thomas Shelby is obsessive about information, about knowing what others know, about controlling the narrative, about being 3 steps ahead in his understanding of how events will unfold. He builds networks of informants. He reads situations with extraordinary perception. He listens more than he speaks because he knows that every conversation is an opportunity to gather intelligence while revealing as little as possible. This gets to something crucial about human nature. We are all constantly signaling, constantly revealing ourselves through our words, our reactions, our choices, and the people who pay attention, who actually observe what's being communicated beneath the surface level, they have an enormous advantage. Tommy notices everything, the tiny hesitation before someone speaks, the glance exchanged between allies, the change in someone's routine. All of these are data points that tell him what's really happening beneath the official story. And because he's patient, because he accumulates information before acting, he's able to make moves that seem impossibly prescient to everyone else, but are actually just the result of superior information processing. The hidden truth here is that most people are blind to 90% of what's happening around them because they're too caught up in their own narrative, their own concerns, their own self-image. The people who dominate in any field are usually the ones who've learned to quiet their own ego, enough to actually perceive reality as it is rather than as they wish it to be. Thomas Shelby is constantly testing his perceptions against reality, constantly updating his understanding based on new information, constantly willing to revise his plans when the data changes. This intellectual humility combined with strategic confidence is the exact formula that creates unstoppable momentum. The ninth hidden truth is about reputation and perception management. And this is where Thomas Shelby operates at a level that most people never even recognize exists. Your reputation is not what you are. It's what people believe you are. And in practical terms, that perception is often more powerful than reality. Tommy understands this completely, which is why he's so deliberate about crafting his image, about controlling the stories that circulate about him, about creating a persona that serves his strategic interests, even when it doesn't reflect his full complexity. Think about the Thomas Shelby that his enemies perceive ruthless, unpredictable, possibly insane, definitely dangerous. This reputation does enormous work for him because it makes people hesitant to cross him. It creates uncertainty about what he might do. It makes his threats more credible because people believe he's capable of anything. But this persona is partially constructed. It's strategic exaggeration of certain qualities and strategic concealment of others. The real Tommy has vulnerabilities, fears, moments of doubt, but he never lets his enemies see those aspects because they would immediately become leverage points. The sophisticated understanding here is that everyone is managing their reputation, whether they realize it or not. The only question is whether you're doing it consciously and strategically or unconsciously and haphazardly. Most people leak information about themselves constantly. They reveal their insecurities through overcompensation, their fears through what they avoid, their weaknesses through what triggers them. Thomas Shelby maintains operational security on his inner life, while broadcasting carefully selected signals about who he is and what he's capable of. And this asymmetry of information gives him a tremendous advantage in every negotiation and conflict. The 10th hidden truth is perhaps the most uncomfortable one of all. Most people are not driven by principles. They're driven by incentives. And if you can understand someone's incentives, you can predict and influence their behavior with remarkable accuracy. Thomas Shelby doesn't waste time appealing to people's better nature or trying to convince them through moral arguments. He identifies what they want and either provides it, threatens it, or redirects it to serve his purposes. This sounds manipulative, and it is, but it's also simply accurate about how human behavior actually works. We like to think we're principled, that we make decisions based on ethics and values and what's right. But observe your own behavior honestly, and you'll see that most of your choices are driven by incentives, by what you'll gain or lose, by pleasure and pain calculations, by social status concerns, by resource acquisition, by comfort and security. Thomas Shelby is just honest about this. He doesn't pretend people are better than they are. He works with human nature as it actually exists rather than as he wishes it existed. When he needs someone to do something, he doesn't give them a speech about duty or honor. He shows them why it's in their interest to comply and what it will cost them not to. This is the adult approach to human relationships and human management, recognizing that sustained behavior change requires sustained incentive alignment. You can't inspire people to act against their interests for long. Eventually, the incentives win. Eventually, people do what benefits them most. The leaders who understand this don't fight against human nature. They harness it. They create systems where people's self-interest aligns with the collective goal, where doing what's good for the organization also happens to be good for the individual. Tommy builds his empire this way, by making sure his people profit when he profits, by aligning incentives so that betraying him costs more than staying loyal. The 11th hidden truth is about conflict and how it's inevitable, necessary, and ultimately productive when handled correctly. Society teaches conflict avoidance, teaches that disagreement is problematic, that friction should be minimized, that everyone should get along. But Thomas Shelby understands that conflict is simply what happens when different interests collide. And that's not a problem to be solved, but a reality to be managed. He doesn't avoid conflict. He initiates it strategically when it serves his purposes. And he understands that sometimes the only way forward is through confrontation, through establishing clearly who will prevail when interests cannot be aligned. Throughout Peaky Blinders, Tommy is constantly in conflict with other gangs, with the establishment, with the government, with his own family, with himself. But notice how he approaches these conflicts. He doesn't let them become personal vendettas that cloud his judgment. He treats them as strategic problems to be solved. When he goes to war with someone, it's because he's calculated that conflict is less costly than accommodation, and he fights to win decisively so the conflict doesn't have to be repeated. When he makes peace, it's because he's determined that the cost of continued conflict exceeds the benefit, that he negotiates from a position of strength rather than desperation. The hidden truth here is that the ability to engage in conflict effectively, to stand your ground, to fight when necessary, and negotiate when profitable. This ability is essential for success in any competitive domain. The people who avoid all conflict don't achieve peace. They achieve exploitation because others quickly learn they won't defend their interests and act accordingly. Tommy shows us that real peace, real security, comes from the demonstrated capacity and willingness to engage in conflict when your boundaries are crossed, which paradoxically means you actually experience less conflict because people think twice before testing you. The 12th hidden truth is about time and patience, and how the long game always beats the short game when played by someone with discipline. Thomas Shelby is playing chess while most people are playing checkers. He's thinking 10 moves ahead. He's setting up situations that won't pay off for months or years. He's willing to take short-term losses for long-term gains. This temporal sophistication is one of the clearest markers of strategic intelligence, and it's something most people completely lack because they're trapped in immediate gratification cycles. Watch how Tommy makes decisions throughout the series. He's constantly asking not just what happens next, but what happens after that and after that. He's modeling out the cascading consequences of his choices. He's patient enough to let situations develop rather than forcing immediate resolution. When someone crosses him, he doesn't always retaliate immediately. Sometimes he waits. He gathers information. He sets up the conditions for a response that will be far more devastating because it's been carefully prepared. This patience is power. It's the difference between reactive and proactive, between being controlled by events and controlling them. The truth here is that most people lose not because they lack talent or intelligence, but because they can't delay gratification. They need immediate results, immediate validation, immediate payoff. And this makes them predictable and manipulable. The people who win consistently are the ones who can operate on longer time horizons, who can endure discomfort and uncertainty in service of bigger objectives, who can watch others cash out early while they continue building toward something larger. Thomas Shelby embodies this completely. He's willing to suffer now for power later, to be patient now for dominance eventually. And this willingness to play the long game is why he rises from nothing to the highest levels of society. So what's the ultimate hidden truth about human nature that Thomas Shelby understood? It's this: the world is not fair. It's not designed to reward goodness or punish evil according to some cosmic principle of balance. The world is a competitive arena where resources are scarce and everyone is trying to secure their position. And the winners are not the ones with the best morals, but the ones with the best strategies. The ones who understand how humans actually behave rather than how they claim to behave. The ones who can see the game clearly and play it effectively without being paralyzed by the illusions everyone else accepts as reality. This doesn't mean you should become ruthless or cruel or abandon all ethics. Thomas Shelby himself maintains certain principles, certain lines he won't cross, certain values he protects. But it means you should be honest about the nature of the game you're playing, strategic about how you engage with it, and realistic about what it takes to win. It means recognizing that power creates opportunities that virtue alone never will. That being effective is more important than being liked. That your first obligation is to yourself and those you've chosen to protect. And that the people who succeed are not the ones who follow all the rules, but the ones who understand which rules can be broken, and when breaking them serves a larger purpose. Thomas Shelby shows us what it looks like to live with eyes open, to see human nature as it actually is rather than as we pretend it is, to operate with both strength and intelligence, with both principle and pragmatism, with both heart and strategy. He's not a role model in the simple sense. His methods are often brutal, and his life is complicated by violence and trauma. But he is a demonstration of what becomes possible when you stop lying to yourself about how the world works and start engaging with reality on its own terms. The hidden truth about human nature is that most people are playing a game they don't understand by rules that don't actually exist. And the moment you see through the illusions, the moment you grasp how things really operate, everything changes. You become dangerous, not because you're cruel, but because you're clear. Not because you're evil, but because you're effective. Not because you've abandoned your humanity, but because you've accepted it completely, with all its complications and contradictions and uncomfortable realities. And that's the truth nobody wants you to know, because the moment you understand it, you become much harder to control, much harder to manipulate, much harder to keep in your place. And there are a lot of people with a vested interest in maintaining the illusions that keep you weak, confused, and compliant. Thomas Shelby rejected those illusions, built his own reality according to his own rules, and rose from the streets of Birmingham to the halls of Parliament. And while his path was violent and his methods were extreme, the underlying principles he operated from, clarity about human nature, strategic thinking, emotional control, long-term planning, effective conflict management, these are the principles that determine success in any domain. Legal or illegal, violent or peaceful, conventional or revolutionary. The game is the same everywhere, only the pieces and the boards change. But the fundamental dynamics of human competition and cooperation remain constant. And the people who understand these dynamics will always have an advantage over the people who pretend they don't exist.